You know that sick feeling you get when someone casually mentions their retirement account? That moment when you wonder if you're catastrophically behind? If everyone else figured out some financial secret you missed? Here's the thing. While our culture sells the idea that $1 million retirement is standard, that it's the bare minimum for security, only about 2.6% of Americans actually have that much saved specifically for retirement, not net worth. Not counting houses or cars or that business idea, just retirement accounts. Out of every 100 people, only 2 or 3 have reached 7 figures in the money designed to support them after work ends. And, according to research from behavioral economists and neuroscientists, the reason most people fall short has almost nothing to do with discipline or intelligence. It's about how our brains are fundamentally wired to struggle with abstract future planning. Stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you will completely change how you see your own financial situation and why you're not broken for feeling behind. Let's start with what most people believe. The financial advice industrial complex has spent decades convincing us that $1 million is the entry point to a secure retirement. Magazine covers, online calculators, every retirement planning article you've ever clicked, they all point to the same number, $1 million. The message is clear. If you don't hit this benchmark, you failed. You weren't disciplined enough, you didn't sacrifice enough. You should have started earlier, saved harder, wanted it more, and here's where the psychology gets brutal. When you internalize this standard, when you measure yourself against $1 million finish line, you're essentially comparing yourself to a population that barely exists. The Federal Reserve's survey of consumer finances shows that the median retirement savings for all American households is about $87,000. Not the average, which gets skewed by the ultra-wealthy, the median. Half of all households have less than that saved for retirement. Among people in their late 50s and early 60s, the group closest to retirement, the median is only around $185,000. These are people who've worked for decades, who presumably understand the stakes, who should be at their peak saving years. And they're nowhere near $1 million. But society doesn't tell you that part. Society doesn't mention that you're being measured against a benchmark achieved by fewer than 3% of people. So when you look at your own retirement account and feel like a failure, you're not responding to reality. You're responding to a manufactured standard designed to make you feel inadequate. A 2018 study from the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business found that financial shame, the feeling that you're failing at money, triggers the same neural pathways as social rejection. Your brain literally processes financial inadequacy the same way it processes being excluded from your tribe. And here's the twist. Most of that shame comes from comparing yourself to aspirational standards that almost nobody actually meets. Let me paint you a picture of what's actually happening in most American households. Picture someone who started saving in their 30s. They're contributing to a 401k, maybe maxing out their employer match. They're doing everything the advice says to do. Over 30 years, even with market returns averaging 7% annually, they might accumulate $500,000 to $700,000. That's real wealth. That's more than most people achieve, but it's not $1 million. And according to the financial media, it's not enough. So this person spends decades doing the right thing, building genuine security, and still feels like they fell short. Now here's where the neuroscience gets interesting. Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize for his work on behavioral economics, identified something called temporal discounting. Your brain is wired to value immediate rewards, exponentially more than distant ones. $100 today feels more real, more valuable, more urgent than $1,000 in 30 years. This isn't a character flaw. It's evolutionary programming. For most of human history, the future was uncertain and dangerous. Surviving today mattered more than planning for a retirement that might never come. So your brain developed shortcuts, heuristics that prioritize the present over the abstract future. What this means in practice: every time you're deciding whether to save for retirement or pay for something you need right now, your brain is weighing a concrete present need against an abstract future benefit, and the present almost always wins. Not because you're undisciplined, but because your neural wiring is working exactly as designed. A 2016 study from Stanford University found that when people imagine their future selves, the brain regions that activate are the same ones that activate when thinking about strangers. Your 65-year-old self doesn't feel like you. It feels like someone else. Someone you might help if you have the resources, but not someone whose needs feel as urgent as your own. Let's talk about what $1 million in retirement actually does for you, because this is where the gap between perception and reality gets even stranger. Using a conservative 4% withdrawal rate, which is what most financial planners recommend to avoid running out of money, a $1 million portfolio generates about $40,000 per year before taxes. Add Social Security, which averages around $1,900 per month, and you're looking at roughly $63,000 annually for a single person. For a couple, maybe $86,000 to $96,000 combined. That's comfortable. That's secure. But it's not luxury. It's groceries and utilities and healthcare and a modest lifestyle. The $1 million retirement that our culture has mythologized as ultimate success is actually just baseline security. And most people don't even reach that baseline, not because they're failures, but because the system was never designed to get them there. Here's what nobody tells you about retirement saving. It's not actually about the contributions. It's about time and compounding. Someone who saves $500 per month starting at age 25 will likely end up with more than someone who saves $1,000 per month starting at age 45, even though the second person is contributing twice as much. The math is brutal. Starting late, even with heroic saving rates, often can't compensate for lost compounding years. And in a country where most people are living paycheck to paycheck in their 20s and 30s, where student loans and childcare and housing costs consume every available dollar, starting early is a privilege most people simply don't have. A 2021 analysis from the National Bureau of Economic Research found that the biggest predictor of retirement wealth isn't income or discipline, it's whether someone had access to an employer-sponsored retirement plan in their 20s, not whether they used it aggressively, just whether they had access. That single factor explained more variance in retirement outcomes than education level, career choice, or saving behavior. The system is the filter, and most people get filtered out not because they failed, but because the infrastructure failed them. But here's where the psychological cost gets truly insidious. When you're constantly told you're behind, when every financial article implies you should have started yesterday, when the retirement calculators show you're projected to run out of money at 73, you stop looking. You stop checking your balance. You stop contributing because it feels pointless. Behavioral economists call this learned helplessness. When the gap between where you are and where you're supposed to be feels insurmountable, your brain shuts down. It stops trying, not because you're lazy, but because trying without hope of success is psychologically unbearable. There's also something called present bias, which interacts with all of this in brutal ways. When you're struggling with rent, with medical bills, with keeping food on the table today, retirement savings feels like a luxury. It feels irresponsible. How can you justify locking money away for 30 years when you might not make it 30 days? And the data backs this up. The Federal Reserve reports that 37% of Americans couldn't cover a $400 emergency without borrowing or selling something. These aren't people choosing present pleasure over future security. They're people in survival mode. And brains in survival mode don't plan for retirement. They plan for making it through the week. Let's talk about the hidden struggle that nobody mentions, the psychological weight of knowing you're not where you're supposed to be, the shame of avoiding conversations about retirement because you don't want to admit how little you've saved, the anxiety that keeps you up at 3 a.m. doing mental math that never adds up, the relationships that fracture because one partner is paralyzed by financial fear and the other can't understand why you won't just start saving more. According to a 2020 study from the American Psychological Association, financial stress is the leading cause of anxiety in American adults, surpassing health concerns and relationship issues. And retirement anxiety specifically, the fear of running out of money in old age, creates a constant low-grade dread that affects everything from sleep quality to physical health to decision-making capacity. You're not just behind on saving. You're carrying the psychological burden of that deficit every single day. And here's something that'll mess with you. The people who do reach $1 million in retirement savings often don't feel secure either. A 2019 survey from Charles Schwab found that people with $1 million to $5 million in investable assets reported feeling only marginally more financially secure than people with $250,000 to $500,000. The goalpost keeps moving. The brain adapts to new baselines. What felt like ultimate security when you were broke feels merely adequate once you achieve it. This is called hedonic adaptation. And it means that chasing financial security through hitting arbitrary numbers is psychologically futile. The feeling of enough is internal, not external. It's not about the number in your account, it's about your relationship with uncertainty. So, what does all this actually mean? First, if you don't have $1 million saved for retirement, you're not an outlier. You're not a failure. You're in the 97.4% majority that society conveniently ignores when setting expectations. The financial advice you've been fed was designed to sell products, not to reflect reality or account for how human brains actually work. Second, the shame you feel about your retirement savings is manufactured. It's not based on what's normal or achievable for most people. It's based on aspirational standards created by an industry that profits from your anxiety. When you compare yourself to the 2.6% and feel like you fell short, you're comparing yourself to people who had advantages you likely didn't have. Earlier, access to retirement accounts, higher incomes, family wealth, employer matches, fewer financial emergencies, better health, more time. Third, your brain is not broken for struggling with retirement planning. Temporal discounting, present bias, mental accounting, loss aversion, these are all normal cognitive functions that happen to work against long-term saving. You're not undisciplined. You're human. And the system that expects you to override millions of years of evolutionary programming through sheer willpower is the thing that's broken, not you. Here's what matters more than the specific number: trajectory and intention. Are you saving something? Anything. Even $50 per month is meaningful because it creates a habit, a pattern, a relationship with your future self. The psychological benefit of taking action, of refusing to give up even when the numbers look bleak, is more valuable than you realize. It shifts you from helpless to agent, from victim to participant. And here's something the financial industry won't tell you. $500,000 in retirement savings, paired with Social Security, paired with a paid-off house or lower cost of living, can create a perfectly stable retirement. You don't need $1 million to survive. You need enough to cover your actual expenses. And those expenses are wildly variable depending on where you live, what you value, how healthy you are, and what your life looks like. There's also this beautiful paradox. The people who stress the least about retirement are often the ones who have the least saved. Not because they're irresponsible, but because they've made peace with uncertainty. They've accepted that life is fundamentally unpredictable, that control is an illusion, that you do what you can and adapt to what comes. This isn't denial, it's resilience. And sometimes resilience is worth more than $1 million. So if you're watching this and feeling behind, here's what I want you to hear. You're not broken. You're not irresponsible. You're not failing. You're navigating a system designed to make you feel inadequate, so you'll buy more products, work longer hours, sacrifice more of your present for a future that's never guaranteed. The $1 million benchmark is not a moral standard. It's a marketing target. And most people, the vast majority of people, will never hit it. Not because they didn't try hard enough, but because the math and the system and the brain wiring and the access and the timing all have to align in ways that rarely happen. What you can do is this: save what you can, when you can, without destroying your present quality of life. Automate it if possible so your brain doesn't have to fight itself every month. Increase it when you get raises. Take employer matches if they exist. But don't let the gap between where you are and where some calculator says you should be rob you of peace today. Because here's the truth: nobody wants to say out loud. You could do everything right and still fall short. You could save aggressively and hit a market crash at the worst possible time. You could plan perfectly and face a health crisis that wipes you out. The future is uncertain. The only thing you actually control is what you do today. And if what you can do today is less than what the experts say you should do, that doesn't make you a failure. It makes you someone living in reality, not a spreadsheet. If this resonated with you, if you've been carrying shame about retirement savings and needed permission to put it down, subscribe for more content that validates your reality instead of selling you fantasies. Drop a comment and tell me where you actually are with retirement saving. Not where you think you should be, where you actually are. Because the more we talk about the reality instead of the myth, the less power the myth has to make us feel broken. You're not behind, you're just human. And that's exactly enough.